I was saying earlier that I started on Monday, but it didn't really feel real until Shabbat. So I just want to say thank you I'm so happy to be here. I mean, really, it's just incredible. It's so nice to see so many old faces and new faces. I feel really, really extremely blessed. Thank you. So we're going to talk about Devarim. It's the start of the book of Devarim. I feel like it was a little bit like you somehow knew that August 1st was going to be a Monday. You somehow knew that it was going to be the start of a book. It was like the right time to start being the assistant rabbi. And the entire book of Devarim, of Deuteronomy, is a catalog of a changing of the guard. It starts this week at the very beginning of the book with Moses looking back at all that he and the people have accomplished. He begins by stating where we are now. It's the 40th year in the 11th month. We know that Israel wanders in the desert for 40 years, which means that Israel is at the beginning of Devarim, we're at the end of all this wandering. We're all the way up into their 11th month, and they have 1 month to go before they reach the Holy Land. And Moses is growing nostalgic. He begins his look back in a slightly curious way. He starts off his retelling of the story of our collective history from leaving Har Sinai. And almost immediately he says, "The first thing I said to you upon leaving Sinai was that I cannot bear the burden of you alone. Lo uchal levadi laset etchem. I cannot do it alone," he says. This is not a story of just one person, but rather of an entire people. Devarim is Moshe's goodbye and his mournful love letter to the people of Israel. So I started work on Monday, August 1st, as I said, as the assistant rabbi. And so this week here, there's also been a changing of the guard. And as with any transition and change, there is a little bit of mourning that goes along with it. So I wanted to take my own opportunity to get a little nostalgic and look back at what CBST has given me over the course of my previous year as an intern before I begin this new chapter and look forward. But before I do that, just one brief aside. I want to ask, has anybody here heard the phrase, "Where were you radicalized"? Is that like a phrase that people know? Okay, like show of hands, you got, okay, great. So I'm actually not entirely sure where the phrase originated, and if you know, please find me after services. I'd really love to know. I'm hoping it's like a queer feminist somebody, but we'll see. But we all know the general meaning. Where were you when you first started developing a consciousness about the injustices of the world, such that you wanted to get up and do something about it? And I'll give just a brief shout out to my middle school teacher, Bob Minder, Zichrono Livracha, who taught us like true young adults and devoted himself to opening up our young suburban sheltered minds to inequality and discrimination. But what I've been thinking about this summer is a slightly different, but maybe a more pertinent question of the same kind, which is, where were you when you were shown a culture of radical care? Where or when have you been shown a culture of radical care? I came up with this term this summer, or at least I thought I came up with it, but I have since done a little bit of research, and I found an article put out by Duke University Press titled "Radical Care: Survival Strategies for Uncertain Times." There's apparently an academic study on this. And here's how the authors, Hobart and Neese, define radical care. Radical care is a set of vital but underappreciated strategies for enduring precarious worlds. And here's their slightly more jargony definition. Radical care is a set of strategies used by individuals and groups across historical periods and in different parts of the world when institutions and infrastructures break down, fail, or neglect. This is the kind of care that can radically remake worlds. So now let's look back and catalog some of what happened in the year I was a CRRI at CBST. I started my time firmly planted in the pandemic. Last year, I started almost exactly as High Holidays began, and we were just a very small team here in the sanctuary, and we were grateful that we were even able to be in the sanctuary and not at home on Zoom. And Now we're about to, God willing, be at Masonic Hall, and so we can really give thanks that so much can happen in a year. But over the course of the year, COVID continued to ebb and flow. We went back to being totally remote for the month of January during the Omicron wave, if you remember that. And then the war in Ukraine broke out, and the Supreme Court killed Roe. So let's see, institutions and infrastructures breaking down, failing, or neglecting? I'd say check, check, and check. It could have been a year where I felt alone and disconnected, but instead I didn't. Instead, I felt buoyed, I felt hopeful, I felt inspired, and I felt cared for. So where was I radicalized? CBST, of course. Actually, 2 communities over the course of the pandemic truly taught me what it means to live and be in a community of radical care. The first was my chosen family in Boston, my pod. I have not known the true meaning of the word community until the 8 of us were forged in fire by the pandemic. For 2 years, we unfailingly made dinners together, drove each other to the airport, went grocery shopping for each other, picked up medications for one another at CVS, and I feel confident that if one of us had had a child, the other members of the pod would have come over and changed the diapers and helped put the baby to bed. And in fact, this past February, my car finally broke down. I finally said goodbye for the final time. And I went 4 months without a car in Boston, where you really do need a car. And the only reason I was able to do that is because of my chosen family in Boston, who were willing to lend me their car at any moment that I needed it. This was a community of radical care. But the other community was, of course, CBST. At CBST, I saw bowls upon bowls of soup sent out when community members were ill. I saw flowers sent to brighten up hospital rooms. I saw community members creating study groups and saying, of course, anyone is welcome to join and learn with us. I saw phone calls that were made purely for the purpose of saying, I'm just checking in, tell me how you're doing. Over and over, the guiding philosophy that I saw practiced every single day here was, we are here for you, truly here, and now what can we do to help? This is a community of deep, radical care. In each place, the ways of showing up were not large or grandiose. In fact, they were usually small and mundane, soup and groceries. They were about asking what needed to be done and then doing it, simply and quietly. And they were done not out of some large show of charity, but rather more authentically in acts of solidarity. And this is the key. Hobart and Neese say, these vital but underappreciated acts are what make radical care critical to our survival. What is it that Moshe said? I cannot bear this burden alone. Lo uchal levadi laset etchem. Rashi says this verse is made for us to question. Even Moshe, is it really possible that our leader who parted the sea could not do this work alone? And the answer is yes. God wanted Moses to be supported by systems of care. The Torah itself implores us, do not try to go it alone. The journey is too challenging for that. We must surround ourselves with a community of carers. So leaving our look back and looking to the future, I have no idea what these next few months or years will look like. Monkeypox, more COVID, more nonsense with the Supreme Court, a renewed fight for LGBT rights that we thought were put to bed long ago. Unfortunately, most likely, yes. But here's what I do know. I would not want to be anywhere else other than CBST during these uncertain and precarious times. I would not want to be anywhere other than this holy community of radical care, where we will continue to do the vitally important work of caring for one another in the small and mundane ways. We will continue to pick up the pieces that have been neglected or fallen apart by the country at large, and we will continue to carry the burden together and know that we are not alone. Shabbat Shalom.